Poem Takionkoi. History arrived at the colonies as repetitive commandments: one God, one history, one tribute. Education was never meant to set Indians free. Instead, Indians were forced to sit down in fear and desperation, to learn, to save their souls, to erase their world. What is history if not a classical narrative of a glorious past, of people that try to make sense of the cosmos, of conquest of wild territories, of maps with sea routes and monsters of trade, with tentacles of spices, silk, and gold? What people once knew was renamed. Quechua names of sacred things, foods, and animals were replaced. Castellan became the new language of their ancient gods and their totems, leading to centuries of discoveries, sea voyages, botanical diaries, and more symbolic violence. Andean words were buried. Persian and Latin names began to rule the vast diversity until there were no more spirits of nature, no more kuntur, nor coca quintucha. History has become a race with no finish line, unbeatable. It is a race for labeling everything and everyone, until there are no more species left to be baptized, rediscovered, or exploited. Once the sacred species are named, they turn into a promising future. The rest remain forgotten, lost in a chronicle, unblessed, unpatented. And yet, the cycle repeats. God Viracocha will sing again, Pachamama will dance and shake with violence, feverish, frosting and burning fields. All ideas will be reborn, and ancient hopes will germinate, and the once dormant roots will breathe again.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And the beauty is filled with so much meaning. Dear poet, would you please tell us who you are?
Thank you, Kétu. Well, my name is Maria Fernanda Vivanco, but please call me Mara. I'm a Peruvian sociologist and a very proud Peruvian.
Some things struck me, some lines really struck me in your poem, Mara. Repetitive commandments, one God, one history, one tribute to erase their world. What people once knew is renamed until there were no more spirits of nature, until there are no more species left to be baptized, not blessed by God. These lines speak so clearly to the contradiction between indigeneity and the colonized world, the colonizer's world. Your work is devoted to food as it applies to that contradiction. Your dissertation speaks so clearly to that contradiction. Could you just sum up, right? Okay, just give us an overview of the dissertation that you presented to the University of Pennsylvania.
Sure. Just to put a bit in context, I study at PhD in rural sociology with a dual title in international agriculture and development at Penn State University. And going to the US, moving there from Peru, it was a whole new experience for me and a way to see a country and societies that I admired already before, but now I could see in myself how I was reproducing some dichotomies and how what was my position in those debates. So for my dissertation, I studied a list of many crops that were once named as the lost crop of the Incas. I remember that I was one in the library because at Penn State University, I visited the library and I was always curious about the Indian section, Peruvian section, Latin American section. So I wanted to see what's going on there, like what do they have in there? Because I heard before that sometimes those libraries have even more about Peru than Peru itself. So I was looking at a report from 1984 with a very ethnobotanic picture with some fruits, Indian fruits that I called pepino. And it was titled The Lost Crop of the Incas. So there was a list of 31 crops that were mentioned as unknown by the general society, but with promising characteristics. And one of them was quinoa. And during that period of time, let's say I started my PhD in 2016, but it was already 2018. I remember that I saw many people, many students, my professors eating quinoa. And for me, it was something that it was quite common. But in there was a different type of appreciation of. And I was thinking like, okay, this is from 1984 and quinoa was not known there already, like by the Occident. So what made it like a mainstream food? Who decided like now quinoa is gonna be like the new superfood that everyone should be eating? So I was thinking like, it's not that Peruvians started to promote quinoa itself. Maybe it's something from outside that says, now this is the food that everyone should be eating. And maybe that food is going to change or going to be replaced by a new one. And what happens with Peruvians that started to produce that? Well, so that's how I started to be interested in the dominance or political relationships that occur between the global South, global North regarding food.
And when you came to the US, how did you identify? I mean, what was your identity? How did you understand yourself as a Peruvian woman in the world?
Yeah, that was a really interesting moment for myself. In Peru, we were not used to use racial categories, to be honest. We talk about ethnic groups, especially to differentiate people that speak another language. The second most spoken language in Peru is Quechua, and Aymara is the third one, and there are like many other Amazonian languages as well. So I don't speak Quechua myself. I know some words and I can understand some things, but I'm not a part of an ethnic group. To be part of for example, let's say to be indigenous, you need to be part of an indigenous community that is recognized by the government. So it's not that easy to say that. It's like a complicated figure. It's like self-recognition, but also it has like a formal recognition as well. So I always identify myself as not necessarily white, but not dark enough to say that I'm like brown. So I was always in between, like, what am I exactly? And I was in a very white school. I remember that my experiences were different than my friends, classmates. I noticed that I have different features, and what I knew, it was that I was a daughter, of immigrants that came from regions that were not the capital. Peru is a very centralized country. Either you are from Lima or you are from a province. So That's how we divide things generally. So I knew that my parents were from provinces, and they came to Lima when they were already older, so they were not limeños itself. So I was raised by being limeña, but not feeling limeña all the time. So by going to the US, I had to fit in this new category for me to be Latina, Hispanic, because I speak Spanish, and to notice how people were expecting some of characteristics in myself, in behavior, to be more sassy, to be like loud, maybe. And so I started, like, first of all, like, to play a bit with that category as well. Like, okay, I'm assuming this, I know that I'm Latin American, but now I guess that I have to be the Latina that I want to be. So yeah, that was new for me.
Wow. Wow. It sounds kind of like an identity crisis.
Well, at the beginning, it was very fun. It's like, oh, so I guess I'm a Latina now. So, and I was playing with my roommates. I have American roommates, and I was saying, yes, I mean, I cook while I'm dancing salsa all the time. So I guess that I'm Latina. But that started changing. Because people sometimes make some comments that maybe at the beginning, because I was in this honeymoon process, like everything is new, everything is so different, I feel different. But then you start to see some nuances, like in what kind, how they refer to you, how is it framed. And sometimes the word exotic appear, or like cinnamon skin tone appear. So I know that my skin tone varies, especially now I look pale for my own standards, but I know that when it's summer, I look different. And if I'm wearing like, if I'm weaving my hair, I look different as well, like other features appear. But then it became more, it was critical during the time that Trump administration happened, because there were those were dark times indeed. You could see that the state college where I was living, although it's a very respectful environment, very respectful people, teachers, students as well, you just go out 20 minutes away from there and you could see like Trump supporters flags, or like some kind of displays. So it was scary to go outside sometimes, just to go hiking and people looking at you differently. Yeah, those were times that I could notice that it's like I cannot play anymore with my identity because it's very obvious now.
Great to hear. Okay, so Kelsey?
I'm interested to hear, looping back to your study of quinoa integrating into your thesis, the parallels that you found between your experience of American friends, colleagues, professors, like how they had certain stereotypes, views about what a Latina woman is, like the characteristics, expectations, the fascination with it, and how there were certain like elements of intrigue and fun in that, but also this aspect of you recognize this importance of being able to speak to and honor your roots and background and the nuance of that. And listening to you speak about that in parallel to quinoa and people seeing the fascination, intrigue, like benefits of it, but overlooking its roots and the nuance and like why that's important. I'm wondering if you just were making any of those observations or like reflections of the parallel between your individual experience of how people in the US were viewing and interacting with you and how they were viewing and interacting with quinoa, and like what needed to be better understood or acknowledged with both kind of life forms in a sense.
Ooh, what a nice challenge. Okay, so I felt that first I went through a phase of asking many questions. I was doing like research, like, since when do you remember, when did you started to eat quinoa? I was asking that to my colleagues, to people that I met, even like Uber drivers. I was asking many things all the time. It's like, do you remember the first time that you had quinoa? Like, do you know where is it from? So because I already knew, but people would assume that probably quinoa was not from the Andes, maybe from Mexico, because I also felt that people were assuming that I was like Mexican. They were asking me how did I eat my nachos, or how, like, if people in Peru were eating nachos. I was saying, no, we don't eat that. That's not common, but we do have potatoes, like tons of potatoes. And I was using those moments of attention to like to be some sort of ambassador, and unrequested ambassador, like, oh, so do you know that we have 4,000 of potatoes in Peru? Oh, not really. So that was like a moment of clarifying. And with quinoa, it was very similar. Like, what I remember, it was that after 2013, when the FAO promoted the consumption of quinoa, there was this big interest for Peruvians as well. Like, quinoa is the food, the Inca's food that we need to promote. But then the prices increased very much, and it was not easy to consume quinoa anymore. So, I mean, it was expensive. We already were consuming it like during breakfast, especially different ways of eating quinoa. We eat it with soup. We eat it like as a beverage in the morning, but to have it as in the way that the Occident was having it, like, oh, I'm gonna have it in a salad, it became expensive. So I was concerned, like, if it's expensive in Lima, how is it gonna be in other regions? Like, people that used to eat it and having it as a good source of protein, are they gonna replace it maybe now with noodles or pasta, rice, or something that maybe is not as nutritious as quinoa is? And the other concern that I had was, like, there's diversity even within species. Like, there are hundreds of varieties of quinoa, but if the ones that are more requested, like by color, there are like 4 colors that are usually requested: white, golden, brown, red. What happens with the other ones? Like, farmers, small holder farmers, are going to stop producing those instead. Now they're going to be producing the ones that are preferred by the Occident. Are we gonna lose varieties? And I couldn't avoid thinking, like, there is also, similar to people in Peru, that are many ethnic groups, like, that are also being forgotten by the government because they are not considered maybe exotic enough. Like, there are so many other groups, there are so many species. So I'm thinking as the species of plants and crops are similar to people sometimes, that we need to protect each one of them. So yeah, I couldn't avoid thinking all those parallels, like between species, animals, plants, and people sometimes. I guess that's very an Andean way of thinking that I can talk about as well.
So as the price of quinoa increased, how did that impact the people who were the natural producers of quinoa, the farmers? How did that impact the farmers?
Yeah, somehow they were more vulnerable. I could talk with some farmers that were saying, oh, I sold all my alpacas and llamas in order to have money to invest in quinoa and to produce more. So yeah, I think that what struck me was that they were not able to, they don't have too many options sometimes. It's like, this is what people want now, we have to produce that. Of course they are taking, or they are making the decision, but it's not a very well informed decision, and it's in disadvantage. So that's what usually makes me very sad to hear. Additionally, they were in more food insecurity. Like by selling quinoa instead of consuming or exchanging quinoa among them, they could be selling in the market. But then another food was more interesting, and quinoa excess was not, they didn't know what to do with it anymore. So what I could find, for example, in my dissertation, was that there was a moment that quinoa was exported as a product, like a pack in packages, but then the seeds were exported. So there was a switch, like 4 or 5 years later, after this big international interest in quinoa in 2013. By 2017, maybe, the seeds were exported, and now other countries start to produce it. So that's when there was no more demand of quinoa from here, especially. Now Canada was producing, Arab countries were also producing it, and so on. And to complement this idea, at the beginning I was so excited to see people abroad consuming quinoa. Then I was concerned. It's like, okay, now this is becoming way too important in everyone's diets. And I could see, for example, out of the pharmacy, that there was not only quinoa among the products considered like in fitness and nutrition. There was also maca, which is another product. It's like, oh no, it's happening again. So I was like all the time concerned, like all these fitness products that for smoothies or so. It's like, what new foods are bringing now that they're going to be demanding? So maca is another crop that is a tuber root. We use the root to give energy. We consume it in the way of a powder in beverages as well in the morning. We drink maca with milk, similar to quinoa with milk in the morning and fruits. But maca was, through biopiracy, was growth in other countries, in Asian countries. So what it happens, I notice, is that once the attention of the world goes to this new, fantastic, super Peru, or maybe other Andean countries, are not prepared for what they need to do to protect their own foods, their own seeds and everything. So we are in this kind of vulnerable situation, similar to the farmers, but now there are going to be patents for those crops, for the cosmetic industry that uses quinoa or uses maca. Biopiracy is gonna happen, but what do we do after that? Like, so those are the nuances of saying, like, these kind of words that are used, like neglected and underutilized, superfoods, smart foods, they are used as something positive all the time. But what they don't show is that how unprotected are other societies that produce those foods.
Right. They are positive in the metropole. They're positive in the mother countries, but they are really a detriment for the people who are the original producers of them, for indigenous people. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And the governments
Yes.
as well, not just the farmers, but the governments rather, have been colonized by the mother countries to produce these crops, these superfoods for consumption internationally. But the people who are the original producers, the farmers, and the economy of Peru has suffered as a result of that.
Yeah, especially I don't know what terms I can generalize for the economy itself, but at least in the pockets of the people that are in the most, like for farmers in general, the ones that are more disadvantaged. So that's why looking at concepts like food security is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can say that if they are selling their products, they are going to have income to buy foods, but maybe not the most nutritious ones or the ones that they wanted to eat. So that's how food sovereignty, food justice matter and are important to bring into the conversation as well. I remember that for my dissertation as well, I put a picture of two hands, the ones like darker hands from peasants, the ones that produce the quinoa, and other ones that are the ones people that eat the quinoa that were white hands. Like there's a racial component in who has the right to eat something, and yeah, mostly the ones that are not considered for food sovereignty, for justice, are the ones that are non-white population.
Okay. Kelsey?
Yeah, to contribute another term or framing of it, your sharing brought to mind for me, right, the concept of cultural appropriation and how the cultural appropriation of quinoa and maca and these certain foods, how it's harming the very cultures it's coming from. And one other thing I'm interested if you spoke to a little bit more is, yeah, the notion of reciprocity in these smaller scale, more localized efforts, or the original ways in which these crops were grown in diverse array and used in diverse, like, different ways of consumption, and how that's becoming more of a monocrop and even narrowed in the ways it's promoted for consuming. That I guess would be something to extend beyond what you were just saying as well, around the actual the land growing, like, practices and ways of viewing the reciprocity in its original cultural context in comparison to the exportation and, like, more international cultural appropriation of these crops.
Yes. So recently I have been more interested in having a more active position in how to define foods. So I finished a PhD. I thought that I would be more involved in an academic environment, but I decided, like, no, although I'm not in the position to be part in, like, political decisions, I can use or have a political role from another entrance. So I decided to be more familiar with gastronomic environments. I started talking with cooks, with chefs, with farmers as well, and to ask many questions. I'm the one that is always, like, going to a restaurant by itself and started ask, like, hey, where does this food come from? Like, from what region of Peru? Do you know? Like, what I want is people from my country to be informed of what they produce. It's not only that we are having these foods to serve to the tourists, which is absolutely fine, but I also want to share this idea that we should embrace our foods as well. Because I have been asked before, like by an entrepreneur, like, so you don't want us to sell things outside? Like, no, it's not about that. It's like to give value to what we have already, to do research. Another component of my dissertation is how much of this knowledge on these foods is taken away. That's another way of colonialism, which is, I understand completely that there are like research teams, which is great. Like sometimes Andean countries don't have the resources to do great research. So teams, international teams are needed. But I was thinking like, okay, how many of those papers are like shared among Latin American countries or in Spanish at the very end? Where do the patents go? And it's like patents are mostly requested outside, abroad, and not necessarily here. What other ways do we have to keep our knowledge and reproduce it? So that's how I started, like, okay, there should be a way, maybe that sounds a bit ambitious, like I could be a source of facilitating knowledge to people that is interested in promoting local foods. And that's what I'm doing somehow. And I'm like becoming more and more active with that.
For you as a Peruvian cultural sociologist, what does sustainable mean? And does your definition of sustainability accord with the definition of sustainability that is popular in the United States? If there is one, there are many. But in terms of food and food security, what does it mean to be sustainable?
Yeah, so sometimes I believe that the term of sustainability is used as a checklist of we're performing these practices, we are like, for example, having organic production, we are letting the soil rest, like regenerative agriculture. Like there are many practices that needs to be fulfilled, but not necessarily understood why. So I don't think that that's wrong, because that's a way of control. How are we doing, if we're doing good to the environment? But I have been reading more and more about Andean cosmovision, Andean way of thinking. We have a different logic or philosophy of understanding how do we relate with the environment as well. For example, part of the relationships that people have among them is also with the nature, but let's say with the water fountains, water sources, with the mountains. It's there should be an equilibrium, which is very interesting, because once that equilibrium is broken, we cannot move together or develop together as a society. So that's why in the Andean culture is very important to give some respects, to provide some gifts to the Pachamama, to the earth. We need to do some payments, like, oh, we're going to have a new crops, we're going to have a new season. Before harvest, we need to say thank you to Mother Earth. Before we started planting, with Mother Earth, like they're sharing coca leaves. I mentioned that in my poem, Coca Quintucha. Coca Quintucha is a practice where you give 3 beautiful coca leaves to someone. That's a way of sharing, like, respect, reciprocity. It's a very personal moment, very magical moment as well. So you consume coca leaves also to give you energy, and those are very sacred for them. So, and you, while you're doing that, are also paying your respect to Mother Earth. You don't exploit Mother Earth as well. You need to let it rest. You need to check if your gods, let's say gods, somehow they are gods. That's why we put names to the mountains. We call it apus, like a father or mother. So sustainability is to keep that balance in between all these elements, with yourself and the environment, yourself and the community, the entire community, with the nature as well, and the gods.
And how
So it's more
responsible?
complicated than just check sustainability in the other way, as a checklist.
Okay. That level of relationship with Mother Earth, how much of that are you finding in the research and in the relationship of the scientists to the work that they are doing concerning food? Is that respect for Mother Nature there? And if it's not there, is their work really of benefit to indigenous people?
That's a good point. I'm just going to give an example. Again, I mentioned in the poem a part where I'm talking about Prussian names or Latin names that were given to crops. So every time that a variety is discovered, the local name that was used was not respected. Like some more decolonial ethnobotanical practices are considering now, like, we cannot just give the name to this plant, give the name of the person that found it or who was part of the research. We need to respect how do the local people, indigenous people, name those crops before. So I think that those are practices that are not considered, and that's a very small example, but what is also important is to check how knowledge is extracted and not returned to the benefit of the population. So not long ago, I'm gonna share a moment that I lived not long ago when I was a PhD student, that I could see how even language within research could harm, like, sensitivities. So I was in a presentation of a research that we're talking about Machu Picchu, not the discovery, but there was a group of researchers from Yale University that went to the area, did an excavation, and they mentioned that they talk with local people somehow to know more about Machu Picchu. But the photos of that visit that they did, and that was in 1912, I'm not wrong, I need to check the date. But the thing is that was a very pernicious moment for indigenous people, because all this team came and they forced people to sit, they measured them, they took photos of them. And when this researcher, of course, he was criticizing that situation, that's a practice that we shouldn't do now because we know better, because we have ethics committees to review that. I noticed that the way that he was framing it, it was also unkind, and he didn't give like he didn't warn the people, like, so the photos that I'm gonna show are these before it happens. So what I found myself in the situation that I was just participating in attending this conference, then I saw photos of people that kind of look not, let's say, kind of similar to me with some similar features. So I felt very, I felt very emotional. I remember I started crying at that moment because he was saying like, oh, people were lied, like they gave them sometimes coins. That was written in some of the diaries of the researchers that were there, like people threw away the money that they received, a couple of coins for just posing in the photo. So let's say that you're just in your house and someone takes you away without explanation just to take your photo and they return you. So I was thinking in all of that, and the researcher was saying like, but I think that they also show some sort of like disagreement of agency. He said agency in those photos. It's like, and before I could think about it, I was already talking like, what kind of agency are you talking? It's like they had no other choice than to be posing there. You cannot just say that agency is showing discomfort. It's like, what has that university say to these indigenous people? Have they like wrote a letter saying like, we should have never done something like this? We are going to invite people from that area to have a better committee, at least something symbolic to say that we can move on from this kind of practices. So I realized that in research, we still have to improve many things because we don't know who is going to be in the audience, who is going to be reading this. Yeah, I I noticed that even when there are very good intentions, there needs to be improved.
When there are very good intentions, still those intentions are coming from colonized minds. And those colonized minds are polluting the grounds for communication because they don't see the other point of view. They refuse to see the other point of view. So the indigenous person is not seen for the value that they truly have, and they are not respected for the value that they truly are in relationship to the earth, but they're seen as a resource or a product, something to be extracted. So the question is, given the academy, that the academy is the place where all of the research is taking place, and the academy is one of the principal institutions for information management in the society, in the empire. How, as a cultural sociologist, somebody who is connected to her people and to the land of her people and to the well-being of her people, how do you negotiate the space of the academy? How do you deal with all of those assumptions that are made about indigenous people and their ways of life? How do you deal with that as a scientist?
Well, yeah, it's not an easy task, but I think that what we can do as researchers, as scholars, in my case, I'm not a researcher like per se anymore, more like a consultant, is to include more voices. Like I work with potato producers, but I don't dare to assume what they need. I need to do the consultation with them and find a way for them to speak their minds as well. I had a very nice experience when I was still in the US in research as a doctoral student. I had to interview women from a Maya community in Guatemala and El Salvador. So what we needed to do as part of this consultancy project was to know if an empowerment project had good results in the area. So we basically needed to know if those women felt that there was a change in their practices, in their way of thinking, like basically, have they empowered or not? So I remember that I was thinking, because I was part of the team designing the interviews and the methods to approach to them. And that was during COVID. So we had to do like online interviews. So it's like, how can I grasp what do they think? Because I was somehow thinking in my Andean experiences of understanding individual concepts as a group. So empowerment sounds like very individual sometimes. But I was thinking that maybe for Mayan people, it's similar to Andean people. So I started to read a lot about Andean Mayan philosophy and everything. So I decided to invite, of course, a Maya translator to the team. Yeah, these Guatemalan women, they could speak Spanish very well. That's why I was part of the team to talk with them. But it's like, no, I insisted that let's bring a Mayan translator. And in some part of the interviews, we did the same question in Spanish and in Maya, and the responses were different. Like when they were talking about like empowerment as a woman, it's like, oh yeah, I get to decide what to do, what I'm gonna eat, what I'm going to invest next thing. But in Maya, it was in Quiche, it was completely different. It was saying like, I'm a woman that motivates other women to be confident, to sometimes denounce if they are like living under violent situations. So it was not only about their own development, but it was like a communal, a collective development. So I was thinking like, okay, it's good that in research teams, they consider people with other perspectives like mine that can also bring other people into the table to talk, to make a more rich, produce more accurate knowledge somehow.
More accurate knowledge. Yes. Back to your poem about the changing of the words for the food, for what they came across. They changed the words, and so they changed the meaning, and they changed the philosophy. Your work as a consultant throws me back to the beginning of your dissertation and your reference to Tupac Amaru. I will be back and I will be millions. It sounds like going to the university in the United States, you discovered something so central about your identity that you had to go back home to practice what it was you had learned in the academy. Because if you continued to be in the academy in the States, you would continue to be violated as an individual. But back home, as a researcher and as a consultant, you were acting collectively with the people to push forward their best interests and your best interests as well. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I guess. uh, I'm trying to understand also that process, because it would be amazing to stay in the US and maybe work for a great think tank in maybe Washington, D.C. That would be the dream. I was thinking about that. And I can still be working for Peru, even when I'm living abroad. But at the same time, I was thinking, I didn't came here to study how to improve the livelihoods of rural people without doing it that or seeing how that looks like.
Yeah.
I rather go back and to see it myself. Also, I don't see myself all the time living in Peru. I get to travel a lot within Peru and outside. I like to see different places and to compare quite a lot. I was living in France last year, and of course, I was thinking all the time, how do they appreciate so much what they produce? And it's like, we should have that. So all those experiences are really important to me. But yeah, and I also felt very confused, like, why did I need to go outside to learn more about my country? First of all, there was an economic impediment. If I had to continue studying here, let's say a master, like a graduate degree in Peru, it would have been very, very expensive. I wouldn't have been able to afford that. I could find I was able to find a good scholarship and also a platform to provide knowledge and to learn. So I thought that this is a great opportunity. And actually, when I came back, I also gave like sessions to people that wanted to study abroad. Because for me, it was a knowledge that I was grasping from different places. Like, what do I need in order to study abroad? And when I came back, I was like, okay, I didn't have a job also, but it's like I have this experience that I can share with other people at an affordable price. And now I'm fascinated to see like more than 70 people that I talk with them. I'm not saying that all of them got like scholarships, but many of them, especially women, that they were hesitant at the beginning, like, should I go away? I'm scared. It's like, I was scared as well. Like, but it's like, you need to find your position in the world, in your society, and giving the tools to women, to other people is fascinating. I don't regret at all like going abroad to learn more about myself and how to help my country. And if I can help more people to do that, I will.
Sometimes we have to leave home to find out who we are. Kelsey?
Yes. So it gives you perspective.
Yes. Seeing from afar, definitely.
What I really appreciate.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. What I have like a mentor who is my godfather, we say that in Peru. He experienced that same situation. He is from Cusco, but he was one of the first Peruvians that got Fulbright scholarship to go in the 80s to study in the US. And he received me for a month in the US, and he prepared me for what I was going to experience. I admire him quite a lot, but he was always telling me something that sounds basic, but it's like, you have to always be yourself, to be authentic with yourself. And that's something that people is going to appreciate quite a lot. And I come from Lima, which is a city where people, I'm not saying that they are like faking all the time, but they want to project it the best or something. They want to project that they're white, that they have money, sometimes like any other big capital, or they want to project that how smart they are. So I started to be more aware in how did I projected myself. And that's why I use poetry, because there were things that were not easy to express, maybe to say at the moment in English especially, but I could think and go back to my thoughts and to write what I was feeling. And I really appreciated that. Although it must have been really funny for my advisor and supervisors to find like, oh, she's writing in the methodological part of the dissertation a poem of how did she felt. Oh, this is quite new. But they really accepted that and they found it fascinating somehow. It was like a catharsis, a therapy for myself. But they took it very seriously. Of course, I wasn't expecting them to analyze the poem, but we were encouraged to write our like positionality within the research, that we have our own biases. We have our frustrations. In my case, reading so much about colonialism, it was really hard. Not only to say like, oh, people were discriminating. It's like, oh, people were killed. People were prohibited to eat their own foods. That happened with quinoa, for example, and with other foods that were saying, oh, that's food for Indians. And they were embarrassed to eat them, or scared of eating them, or speak Quechua as well. Not like the generation of my parents. My father, for example, is an architect, and he works with people that comes from regions that speak Quechua, and he was sometimes practicing speaking Quechua with them, and they were embarrassed to answer. And that's really concerning. We want to project that we are a very culturally diverse country as well. So I was thinking like writing, it's a way that it was imposed somehow, because let's go back a bit to pre-Hispanic times. We didn't have like a written language in Peru. There were other ways of communicating. It could be maybe through, let's say, songs, let's say music, or most accurately through dances. There are other ways of expressing knowledge, how do you feel, and to relate to other people. And part of that, the term takionkoi, I'm also thinking about, there are some dances that were practiced even during colonial times as a way of resistance. People were like hiding through that dance, that maybe Spaniards could see them as a like ritualistic practice, or like, oh, during the harvest. But those dances and the songs have some meanings, that there is going to be a time, and that's what takionkoi means. There's going to be a time when the situation is going to switch. Like, that's why people started dancing, like if there were like with fever, like if they were possessed, they were like enunciating that there's something is happening, and now the earth is gonna move, it's gonna shake, and now it's gonna be our time to come back. So yeah, that's the power of using art and some other way of expressing, besides having like a very academic language.
Well, you have a beautiful academic language and an even more beautiful poetic voice. And
thank you.
your ability to speak truth to power in a way that can be heard. That's what I saw in the insertion of your poem into your dissertation. It was a way to speak truth to power and be heard. And it was very refreshing, to say the least. It was refreshing. You mentioned resistance, and two questions. On Proven Sustainable on our website, have you had the opportunity to take a look at the Quechuan section in Proven Sustainable?
Oh, not yet. No, I
Not
haven't
yet.
had it.
Oh, okay. Please do, and get back to us with any comments or anything that stands out for you. That would be very important for us. The other thing is that we have some key words. You have key words in your dissertation. We have some key words like sustainability, resilience, resistance, freedom, endurance, reparations. Do any one of those words have more of a resonance with you than the others? You want me to repeat them?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sustainability, resilience, resistance, freedom, endurance, reparations.
Oh. Yes, I really like the term resistance. I mean, between resilience and resistant, I consider myself a very resilient person. Very optimistic most of the time. But living abroad, I really had very intense experiences. As I mentioned, we, like everyone in the States, went through very dark times during the Trump administration. There were also, as a woman, I experienced difficult moments as well. But I couldn't avoid thinking in, it's gonna sound very classic, but my grandmother or my mom, like seeing all these Latino women that are we don't talk too much about our emotions, because sometimes we're hiding some things. We don't want to make other people feel vulnerable. Like, for example, I don't talk much about bad things that happen with my mother, because I don't want her to be concerned. And if she sees me like too concerned, she fears that I'm not gonna be strong enough. It doesn't mean that we don't have like moments to talk about these things, but we are like, in a hard way, giving support to the other one. And not that long ago, I learned more about the story of my grandmother. She was the one decided to move to Lima. She has 7 children. She escaped from a bad marriage with my grandfather, but she never make us like be upset with him. She also managed to find in a new place, in a massive capital, to escape with all her children. She was pregnant at the moment, and to find a small place, and they could like study. She was working like in 2 jobs. She was providing food. She was always extremely kind. And she was telling me all that story, how she even went to a psychologist in a time where that was not common at all. And she reached for help. And she was telling me like, yeah, that's how we moved to this small house when all your uncles were living in just one room. And then I was thinking, yeah, I remember that house. And that was a very fun house because it was always full of people. And she was like reflecting how hard it was that period. And my mom was saying like, yeah, that was the best time that we ever had. So I was impressed how during that very difficult time, my grandmother was so resilient, and she managed a way to project like something beautiful for all of them. And then I was thinking, if she could do that, and I can do anything. So yeah, it's in between of resilience, but also resistant, because I have this more like decolonial background and commitment. Like, I am resilient to the things that happen to me, but I also want to be resistant in the sense that I want to make other people to listen to my voice and to make a statement with my presence, with how I look, with the way that I think. Yeah, those two words.
Kelsey?
You frame your efforts or project as being decolonized project or a decolonization efforts. So I want to give you the space to explain why it's important for you to frame it in that way, or like what words or descriptions are important for you when describing the initiatives that you are taking now and moving forward, and why should people continue to think about or incorporate or expand definitions of certain words when it comes to the work that you are doing and promoting around culture and food, women's rights, all of that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I'm gonna answer that, but first I'm gonna mention one contradiction that I'm like experiencing now. I'm studying something new. I finished my PhD. I am very happy with my job, and in like my free time, I'm preparing to become a sommelier. So, and I'm studying at a Spanish institute. So like, I'm going to Spain to study again from like, I'm not gonna say like from a colonial perspective necessarily, but definitely from a place where they define how food and drinks should be experienced. So again, I'm putting myself in a position where like, I want to learn how this works. And I think I want to contribute somehow to build how we experience food from an Andean perspective. I don't fear like learning from them, like, oh, they are gonna give me this knowledge and then my ideas are gonna change. I don't fear that anymore. It's like, I want to learn the tools. I want to learn how do they see, how do they measure quality food, like how is it produced? And I want to learn and help how to build that from my country. So that's another way for me to have an active role in decolonialism. Sometimes we assume that to be decolonial is to raise ideas from the North. Or sometimes just think like how our world would have been without being colonized. Unfortunately, we cannot know. What we can do is to ask people to learn more, to grab information. What do we have? That's why I love going to museums in Peru, just to see the vessels, like beautiful vessels in the shapes of foods, like corns. I tried to learn like how much they appreciate that they could like create something in the shape of that, like a cacao bean, maize, to learn from what they could share. Because someone thought like, I'm gonna make this, someone is gonna appreciate it. Okay, so every time they go to a museum, it's like, okay, here I am appreciating something that an ancient Peruvian did. I'm trying to learn this way because I cannot ask them. But what I can also do is to ask people that is producing that now, the ones that are producing tubers, all the varieties of potatoes, trying to compare, to find parallels. Another thing that I didn't have the opportunity to mention is how important all the altitude levels that we have, how the way that our territory is organized, the different climates, all of that is really important in how we experience our nature. It's like there are like 38 ecological zones in Peru, and all of them have shaped how the people live, how they connect with others. So that's something that I think that we need to study more, or to ask ourselves more. How different are the people that live in all these different places, on these different cultures? How can we rebuild what being Peruvian is, what Andean people are? Is going to be a great tool to be decolonial and to build a decolonial project. And that's where I'm here for, and hope to find more people that wants to join me in that pursuit.
One other question. African people were also brought to Peru. What part does African culture play in the work that you are doing with food, and in the relationships with Mother Earth?
Wow, that's a fascinating question. I don't think that I have enough information to answer that. What I have been reading and studying, it's about forced migration. I also teach at the university. I'm teaching a class of anthropology and sociology of food, and I have been introducing these topics to my students. They are students of the Department of Nutrition. They just see food and the nutritious components, but it's like, okay, food, we need to talk more about food systems and how people were brought to work in sugar fields in Peru, how they were forced, how did they brought their own foods. For example, we can go like even when people from Morocco brought like with them some wheat, like women were the ones that came as companions of Spaniard men that couldn't bring their Spanish wives. They came with concubines, and they brought their foods, and they started experimenting planting in here in our soil. And those stories of women or people that were resisting somehow, is like, okay, we're forced to live in a new place, but I'm gonna bring what I know. I'm gonna bring part of my home. For me, it's beautiful. It's, of course, it's sad to know about it, but similar to people that came from Africa that found a new place here, a new way of organizing the territory, maybe like they found these mountains as well. They have to move in areas that could look more similar what they were used to, and plant rice and sugar. and how they are using the spices that are in here. Similarly, I have been studying how Asian people came also once that there was this with this president that decided like we're not going to have more slave people, but we need workers now. So that's how in the 19th century people from China came to Peru, and later in time like Japanese people as well. And that was another fusion of culture, practices, ideas, ways of living came here as well. And how all those elements make our famous gastronomic culture so fascinated, but it still needs to be, I don't know, it needs to be more studied and more praised somehow. But for the people that made it possible, not only because of how it's seen together on a plate. And yeah, I know that there have been more studies now in Peru on African American people, because especially after the national census that finally asked, like, how do you identify yourself? Because that we didn't know much about like the amount of people that were African Peruvian or from indigenous communities. So we are in that moment like to learn more about the characteristics of different populations and what we need to do for them.
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Kelsey, any more questions?
No, this has been incredibly insightful, expansive, thought-provoking, emotional, sincere, collective. Very, very grateful for the conversation and all of the knowledge, experiences, and stories you've shared, and diverse perspectives that you're speaking to. I think you mentioned shortly ago about inviting others to join you in your efforts. So I want to make sure to give you the space to speak to if there are any particular accounts, platforms, websites, like we will share in writing as well. But if someone's just listening or watching this conversation, if you want to let them know any of your direct profiles, sites, or resources you recommend that they engage with or follow or check out, please let us and our audience know that at this time too, so we can all continue to learn and support and join you.
Thank you so much. We really had a great time here. I would like to invite people to check mostly on my Instagram. I think that that's my new way of sharing what I have seen, the conversations that I have with people. And I also made a video of this producer that I wrote about in Proven Sustainable, this Oka producer that is making now this new variety of beverage, which is not wine. And I'm really looking forward to find a way to create a denomination of origin for this new product. And what I really like is that he's someone that has a commitment with our local food, and he's the one producing it and speaking about it. He doesn't need someone else to explain for him. And I want more people to know about him so he can say it like, hey, let's enjoy not only like this wine or new drink that he's gonna call oxalis, like not only to drink it abroad, come here to Peru to feel how is it to drink it here, maybe to harvest some of the potatoes, to see the apus, like the mountains that are like the ones that make possible to have all those conditions to produce this fascinating new product. So it's to experience the Andean world from Andean people, from that perspective, in that place. not only read about it. So I invite people to check also my Instagram where I can share more content about it. And thank you very much. I really enjoy our conversation.
And just one more, not a question, but a request. Would you take us out with the reading of Takwiankwi?
To read it again?
Yes, yes.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Takionkoi. History arrived at the colonies as repetitive commandments. One God, one history, one tribute. Education was never meant to set Indians free. Instead, Indians were forced to sit down in fear and desperation to learn, to save their souls, to erase their world. What is history if not a classical narrative of a glorious past, of people that try to make sense of the cosmos, of conquest of wild territories, of maps with sea routes and monsters of trade, with tentacles of spices, silk, and gold? What people once knew was renamed. Quechua names of sacred things, foods, and animals were replaced. Castilian became the new language of their ancient gods and their totems, leading to centuries of discoveries, sea voyages, botanical diaries, and more symbolic violence. Andean words were buried. Persian and Latin names began to rule the vast diversity until there were no more spirits of nature, no more kuntur, nor coca quintucha. History has become a race with no finish line, unbeatable. It is a race for labeling everything and everyone, until there are no more species left to be baptized, rediscovered, or exploited. Once the sacred species are named, they turn into a promising future. The rest remain forgotten, lost in a chronicle, unblessed, and patent. And yet, the cycle repeats. God Piracocha will sing again, Pachamama will dance and shake with violence, feverish, frosting and burning fields. Old ideas will be reborn, and ancient hopes will germinate, and the once dormant roots will breathe again.